Hi everybody, it's Katie. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about brass solder. Now I've been soldering for about 12 years at this point, and I used to work in copper and brass all the time way before when I could not afford sterling silver. And I still really do like the warmth that copper and brass brings to jewelry. So I decided to do a test this week, and I used 3 different types of solder for brass. I did 2 pieces in each type of solder, and I did the exact same piece in all with all the solders, so we could have as consistent of testing as possible. Now, unfortunately, one of the solders is discontinued. So when I went back to look, I'd already had these solders, I tried them all, and you can no longer get one of the solders. But luckily, that was not one of my favorite solders, so spoiler alert, but I'm still going to show you guys all 3 and tell you what I found. But one of them is no longer available, but that's okay because I do have one that's more my favorite than that one was. Okay, so our first contender in the brass solder competition, if you want to call it that, is actually easy silver solder. Now, why would I use easy silver solder? Like, it's silver solder. Why would you use it on brass, right? Well, I find that when I use it on silver, it has a slight yellow tint to it. And that's why I don't like to use it on silver. I just don't like to use it. It's got that, doesn't have a very good color match to sterling silver. But I thought, well, maybe it would make a good brass solder. So I have used it on brass in the past, and I did it again today. Well, not today, this other week. It is a pretty good color match. It is slightly silverish color on the brass, but if you polish it to like that shiny, bright brass color, it fades into the metal really well. And if you oxidize it, because I did these tests where I did it shiny and I did it oxidized, here is the shiny one. And here is the oxidized one. And I found, I'm going to just look at my notes real quick, that once you polished it and it was shiny, you really didn't notice it. I did patina my brass with Jack's JX, patina for brass and bronze. That's what I like to patina my brass with. And I found that the silver solder didn't quite take the patina quite as well. It took longer, like the brass definitely patinaed before the silver solder did, so I just had to leave it in there longer till the whole thing oxidized. But once I kind of buffed a little bit of that oxidization off, gave that little bit of an antique appearance, it looks great. So both shiny as well as oxidized looks really, really good on the brass with that easy silver solder. I found that the excess silver solder was really easy to sand off. It seemed to be very soft, whatever the metal content is. I did look on Rio Grande, which is where I bought that easy solder, and it said it was 56% silver. So what the rest of it is, I don't know if it's brass. I don't know what else they add into it, but it's 56% silver, and it had a melt temperature and a flow temperature of 1,240 degrees Fahrenheit for melt and 1,325 degrees for flow. All the solders I used, I felt like they worked pretty similar as far as flowing and melting. Okay, so that's our easy silver solder. Okay, so our second contender for our brass solder is actually going to be, which one did I pull out here? Yellow silver solder. Now, I don't know why it's yellow silver solder. Those seem to be 2 different colors right there. But I thought, hey, why not get it and try it? Now, this is, what I found with this is that, let me look at my notes. It had a really good color match, like a really good color match. But the solder seemed to be a harder solder. Like when I went to clean some of the excess off, it seemed like it took a little bit more sanding to get it off. It seemed like a harder solder. There was more discoloration to the brass itself. If you've ever soldered brass, you know that the brass can turn kind of a coppery color when you're soldering it or when you pickle it, because brass is an alloy metal. It is copper and zinc. So the copper does sometimes rise to the surface when you're soldering it. So it did have more discoloration than like the silver solder did. But overall, it wasn't too bad. It polished off pretty well. And it took the patina really well too. I would say that it took the patina better than the silver solder. And again, I did the sample both shiny as well as oxidized, and here is the shiny sample. It looks really good. and I can't really see the excess solder on there. And the oxidized version too also looks really nice, and I'll give you guys a shot at the end of all of them so that you can see them better, because I know this doesn't always focus very well when I hold them up like this. But yeah, overall, wasn't a bad solder. Okay, so for our third contender for brass solder is actually brass wire solder. Well, there you go. They call it brass wire solder. It's for brass. It should work pretty good, right? And you'd be right. It does. It works excellently. I found that the color match was perfect to brass. I found that there was minimal discoloration to the brass. And when I patinaed it, it took the patina exactly like the brass. Unlike the other two solders that I tried previously, where it didn't quite, the solder didn't take the patina quite the same as the brass did, but it ended up looking fine at the end. It took it exactly like the brass. It was essentially one piece when I was done. Here is my shiny sample, and here is my oxidized sample. But yeah, the color match is perfect. I can really only tell my solder seams where I have like a little bit of excess solder on there, just because there's an extra little blob of solder, but the color match is excellent. Really great solder. Okay, so now we're going to get down to the nitty gritty. What do I think? Which is my favorite? And which one of these solders was the one that was discontinued? Well, my favorite, it was actually the brass wire solder. Big surprise, right? Like, it's actually made for brass, and luckily it's perfect. That's the one that I would choose all the time. It has come in a wire form. The other two came in sheet form. But the color match was perfect. There was minimal discoloration. It patinaed great. It polished great. It was a really great solder to use. It acted a little funny when it was flowing, but other than that, it was a great solder to use. The second place is actually the Easy Silver Solder. That was actually my second place solder. I just thought, again, it worked really well. It flowed really nice. It didn't take the patina quite as well, but when you were finished, it looked great. And yeah, I really enjoyed working with it. The third and last place solder was actually the Yellow Silver Solder. Now, lucky for us, that is actually the one that was discontinued, and maybe it was discontinued for a reason. It just wasn't as good as the other ones. Now, none of them were bad solders. All of them work if you have them or want to use them. All of them I would definitely use on brass. But if I were to pick, definitely the brass wire solder is the winner in this case, and the discontinued Yellow Silver Solder is the loser. So I will put the links and the order numbers to these items. You can order them on Rio Grande down in the description, and you guys can start trying to solder brass yourself. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Bye! Okay, as promised, here are all the samples that I did. 2 with Easy Silver Solder, 2 with brass wire solder, and 2 with the Yellow Silver Solder. The shiny ones are here on the left, and the oxidized ones are on the right. Let's zoom in so you can get a better look. Looks pretty good, right? Like, there is, like, I can slightly tell there's a little bit of a silver tone to the solder joints. They probably don't show up so well on camera. Here is that Yellow Silver Solder. Again, looks really great, right? And then lastly, here is the brass wire solder, which was my favorite and was the winner. But like I said, all of them work really well, but you can see the difference, or you can't see the difference. They all work well, but there you go.